Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and this time we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead Season 2, looking at Episode 2. In case you missed Season 1 or any of the other previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 2 is titled A House Divided, and it picks up right where Episode 1 ended. Clementine and Pete find themselves trapped in the back of an old cigarette company van, having barely escaped the zombies at the river, and the reality of the situation quickly sets in as Pete has acknowledged his bite. Unlike characters in a lot of other situations, Pete stays calm and collected as he contemplates removing his leg. The thought of the pain, though, and the fact that Clementine wouldn't be big enough to carry him back after the amputation, keeps him from going through with it. You can choose to give Pete the water that you didn't give the man on the sandbar in Episode 1, and you can even provide him with a cigarette to help ease his mind. I'd say the water is an easy choice, given how good Pete has been to Clem. She does owe him her life after all. But the cigarette is just as easy. They might not be good for his health, but neither is a zombie bite, and he only has a matter of hours left anyway. They spend most of the day in silence, with Pete drifting off to sleep at some point, and as the evening moves in, Clementine is starting to fall asleep herself. An odd noise from Pete stirs her awake, and it isn't long before he shouts and starts writhing in pain. As you go to check on him, he stirs and finally wakes up. It's at this point that Pete realizes his own mortality, wanting to live despite knowing he isn't going to make it. He asks Clem to look out for Nick before deciding it's time to take matters into their own hands and escape the truck they've spent the day in. Clementine can convince him that it's worth trying to get back and tell Nick goodbye for himself, but in the end he isn't up for walking much, and Clem has to flee the area on her own as Pete keeps the zombies distracted. Running for her life, Clementine makes it back to the cabin to discover that Luke and Alvin went looking for her, Nick, and Pete hours prior and haven't returned. Carlos and Rebecca are the only adults left, and after hearing about what happened at the river, they too decide to leave. And this is where I want to address something that is really frustrating about this season when it comes to how the characters act. None of the adults seem to have a clue about how to handle any situation. And if it weren't for the maturity of Clementine and her prior experience with Lee, she probably would be in a lot of trouble here. Krista and Omid put their own desires ahead of her, leading to Omid's death. Pete and Luke are able to at least handle the zombies in the woods when they find her, but they are lost as how to handle her dog bite. Alvin, Rebecca, and Carlos all have their own issues to deal with Carlos trying too hard to hide reality from his daughter, Alvin being too afraid of his wife to have any opinions, and Rebecca being more worried about who the father of her child is than being a functional member of the group. And that's not even getting into the problems Nick is having with his confidence. He doesn't trust himself, let alone anyone else, and it causes him to make some bad decisions, like shooting at a scared little girl who's running away. Every adult seems to be lost in their own little world, and they all act like they're only a couple of weeks into the outbreak, when it's really been close to 2 years at this point. Before leaving the cabin, Carlos asks Clementine, the girl that not even 24 hours prior he thought might be involved with a man they've been trying to hide from, to watch his daughter, Sarah. This is just another example of how lost the adults are in this season. When Clementine showed up, the whole group pondered the possibility that she might be affiliated with Carver. In just a few hours, after breaking into the cabin and stealing supplies, she managed to gain their trust. She disappeared with Pete and Nick, returning a few hours later with a story about Pete being bitten, and Carlos's first thought is to go looking for Pete, leaving Clementine home alone with his daughter? If she had been working for Carver, they would be captured before they even had a chance to realize it. They didn't stop to think that maybe she had walked Pete and Nick into a trap? That maybe Carver is waiting just off in the woods for them to come looking for their friends? While we know that Clem isn't working for Carver, they have no way of knowing that. The one thing we really don't know yet is who Carver is. But that's about to change. Clementine goes upstairs to greet Sarah, and she finds the young girl playing with a Polaroid camera. Sarah snaps a photo of Clementine as Clem is walking through the door, and you can choose to take a photo of Sarah in return or let her take a selfie with the camera. A few moments later, Sarah spots someone, who she assumes is Luke, walking up to the house. As they go downstairs to greet him, however, they realize it isn't Luke at all, but rather some strange man. Before Clem can lock the door, the man opens it and lets himself in. He says his name is George, and though Clementine asks him to leave several times, he proceeds to look through the house. As he's inspecting the upstairs, after seeing a door being shut by Sarah, he discovers the photo the girl had taken of herself lying on the bedroom floor. Now knowing that the people he's looking for have been in the house, the man tells Clementine that the group isn't who she thinks they are, before finally leaving. Throughout the interaction, the man seems to be fairly honest, albeit extremely pushy. He says he's living at a camp nearby, just down the river, and he's fairly straightforward about the fact that he's looking for a group that is very obviously made up of the people Clem has just met. After he leaves, Clem and Sarah sit around and wait for the group to return. Clementine is starting to think they're going to have to go looking for them when they finally come in the back door. Sarah tells them that a man had come by, and everyone starts asking questions about him. It quickly becomes clear that the man is likely Carver, but during the discussion, Sarah says something that stands out. She asks Carlos,
"You're not gonna hurt anyone, are you?"
This sticks out because if they are running from someone they think is going to hurt them, then why would Sarah think her dad would be the one doing the harm? Luke, replying to Sarah, seems to insinuate Carlos would be capable of hurting Carver, which just adds to the mystery of what happened before Clementine knew these people. As they're deciding to pack up and leave before Carver gets back, you have the chance to ask why they left Carver's camp in the first place, and Carlos just deflects the question by saying that Carver is a bad man. He also insists that Clementine would be safer with the group moving forward, and you wind up leaving the cabin with them. As you walk, Rebecca will apologize to Clem for her recent behavior, and you have a second chance to ask about why they are fleeing Carver. At first, she seems to take it as Clementine asking her personally why he's after her, which stands out when taken in the context of Rebecca's doubts about the fatherhood of her baby. When she finally realizes you were asking about the group as a whole, she dances around the question just like Carlos did, saying only,
"It's a long story. He has a hard time letting go."
On the way out of the area, they stop to look for Pete, planning to make sure he's really dead, and they wind up finding what's left of him lying not far from the cigarette truck, with his guts all over and a bullet wound in his head. Clementine notes he didn't have a gun on him, and it becomes clear that someone else must have got to him first. Leaving there, the group heads for the mountains with a 5-day time jump bringing them to a bridge that sits just below a ski lodge. Recognizing the risk of the entire group trying to cross the bridge with no idea of what dangers may lie on or across it, Luke decides that he and Clem should cross first to make sure it's safe. After dealing with some zombies that were upset about not being paid a toll for crossing, the pair find themselves face to face with a stranger whose main concern seems to be whether or not they're assholes. Once it's been established that both sides are more or less friendly, the man offers them some food and shelter before something catches his eye. Coming up behind Clem and Luke is a man with a gun, Nick. Even as they're yelling at him to put the gun down, Nick raises the rifle and fires a shot, striking the man in the jugular and causing him to fall from the bridge. The rest of the group joins them as they scold Nick for being so brash, and they finish crossing the bridge, finding the shelter the man had been talking about. It isn't much, but it's a place to stop and rest for a few moments. Inside the hut the man had apparently been staying in, Clem finds a knife with the initials WM and a couple of cans of food. We also get a little peek into who Alvin really is, as he asks Clementine if she'd be willing to keep the food that they found between them, as Rebecca needs more since she's eating for two. The idea that he would even suggest hiding things from the group is a major red flag on the inner workings of the group as a whole. Rebecca does need more nutrition as her body is working overtime to make a new life, but that should be something the group as a whole is focused on. If Alvin is suggesting hiding the food, it's because he doesn't trust the group to put the needs of a pregnant woman as a high priority. Alvin in general seems to be one of the more trusting members we interact with, so showing that he doesn't trust them says a lot about whether we should. Now, some of the mistrust could be tied to hunger, As we discussed all the way back in Season 1, Episode 2, hunger can make people do and say some crazy things. But given how the group is in general, and has been acting since we met them, it's safe to say that hunger likely isn't the only reason for the mistrust. And it isn't just Alvin who's showing some doubt about the others. A short conversation with Nick, as Carlos and Luke step away for a private discussion, reveals he's worried about how the group sees him, and he doesn't trust them either. He's convinced Carlos and Luke are discussing him, especially as he's just shot someone unprovoked, and he seems jealous of Luke. Before the group can get too comfortable, a herd of zombies coming from the bridge pushes them onward, and they wind up making their way up the mountain to the ski lodge. As they're trying to find a way in and see if anyone else has settled into the lodge, Luke and Clementine head to one of the lift towers, and Clementine climbs up to get a better view of the area. She's able to spot some flashlights down at the bridge they crossed earlier, but before she can tell Luke what she sees, he's pulled away by a commotion on the porch of the lodge. It turns out a group has been staying in the building, and they aren't too happy to see people snooping around. Tensions are climbing as Clem makes her way through the group, but everything comes to a screeching halt when she sees who's arguing for the other side. It's Kenny. The first time I played through, as the series was being released, I thought for sure it was going to be Krista that we were reunited with. Kenny had died down in the alleyway with Ben after all, so I never even considered that he could be the person Clem was surprised to see. I struggled with how to react to seeing Kenny, because on the one hand, he's someone that is tied to Lee and who used to protect Clementine, but on the other, it's been so long in universe since they'd seen each other, and Kenny was closer to Lee than he ever actually was with Clem. He cared for Clementine, and he was good to her overall, but he was more like an uncle than anything else. But I'll be digging deeper into the relationship between Kenny, Lee, and Clementine when we get to Kenny's Friend or Foe episode in a few weeks. Getting back into the moment, the reunion is rather bittersweet, and while Clem is happy to see a familiar face, it's also apparent that, while Kenny has changed, this Kenny isn't a lot different than the Kenny we knew in Season 1. He's met a new woman, Sarita, who saved him when he was at his lowest point, and he's been trying to deal with everything that happened while more or less starting over. Kenny and Sarita have only recently been staying with Walt and Matthew, who were responsible for securing the ski lodge in the first place. Walt is a former teacher, and Clem gets the chance to talk a bit with him while helping prepare dinner. Matthew is Walt's partner, and apparently a free spirit who loves to get out and walk on a regular basis, explaining his absence in the moment. Getting the chance to explore the ski lodge a bit, Clem can help decorate the Christmas tree before making her way up to talk to Carlos, Alvin, and Rebecca. They're in the middle of discussing whether or not Carver would still be tracking them, and trying to decide if it would be safe to stay in the lodge overnight after Clem saw the lights down at the bridge. As they're finishing the conversation, Rebecca starts feeling lightheaded, and Alvin goes off to get her a drink, leaving Clem and Rebecca alone. Rebecca starts talking about the baby and her doubts about whether she'd be a good mom, and she lets Clem feel the baby kick before dropping the bombshell that she doesn't think the baby is Alvin's. While we already knew she had doubts, she seems pretty sure of who the father is as she opens up and shares a fear that telling Alvin would make him hate her. This is another sign of cracks within the group, as while Rebecca apparently hid her feelings from everyone else, she's willing to open up to someone that she's known for only a few days. Some of this might be because Clementine seems like less of a threat and is extremely mature for a child of only 11 years old. But the fact that she hasn't shared any of her doubts or feelings with anyone else in the group speaks to the overall dynamic and lack of trust that she has. And that theme of trust has been really heavy in this episode. The group in general is not trusting of Clementine when she showed up, and they had every reason not to trust her as she stole from them. Carver specifically calls out how the group didn't trust her to begin with when he figures out she's with them. But within a day of meeting her, they seem to trust her more than they trust each other. Nick, Luke, Alvin, and Rebecca all open up to her in ways they seem resistant to do with each other. Some of it could be because of how young and innocent she seems, but the idea that these grown adults would be using her as a therapist and asking her for advice on things, like Rebecca asking her whether or not to tell Alvin about the baby, is insane. The group dynamic is extremely unhealthy, and we can't help but wonder why they're even a group in the first place. Making things worse, Clementine is forced to choose who to eat dinner with. Kenny is sitting at one table with Sarita and Walt, while Luke and the others are sitting at the other table. If you choose to sit with Kenny, Luke gets jealous, and choosing to sit with Luke makes Kenny unhappy. The adults, once again, seem to be incredibly immature and almost seem to be fighting over the affection of an 11-year-old. Both tables have space for her, and it makes the most sense to sit with Luke as that group has been the one she's been a part of recently. Kenny, while being someone Clem knows from the past, is more or less just an acquaintance at this point that she knows no better than Sarita or Walt. Eventually, Kenny comes over and sits with Clem, Luke, and Nick. He tries to make a couple of jokes before the conversation turns to plans and we get a second mention of Wellington. The conversation is a little more tense than it needs to be, and Clem is thrust into the middle of it before Walt comes over and asks Clementine if she could give him a hand outside. As they get outside, he reveals he was trying to help her out of the situation, as he knows it's never fun to be stuck in the middle like that. As they talk, Walt reveals his thoughts on the state of the world and shares a bit of hope in what might be one of the truest sentiments in the series.
They say the world is over, but I'll tell you a secret. It's not. People are more political now than they ever were before. In the end, we can't change the world. All we can do is continue to learn from each other, to empathize, and use our heads.
He also quotes John Steinbeck before referencing the fact that Matthew is working to amass a library. And it's this mention of Matthew that forces Clementine to come to the realization that he might have been the man they met on the bridge. But Walt won't accept that there might be something wrong with Matthew, and before Clementine can get all of her worries out, they are interrupted by Kenny, who's doing a check on the perimeter before the snow starts coming down too hard. As the three of them make their way around back, they stumble on someone peeping in the window. To them, she's a complete stranger, but we recognize her from day 220 of the outbreak as Bonnie. Kenny wants to shoot her right then and there, but Walt is more worried about her well-being and offers her food instead. He goes inside and grabs a box, bringing it out and wishing her well as she leaves before Clementine goes back inside so Kenny and Walt can have a word in private. On the one hand, Walt could be seen as reckless. He not only offers Bonnie food, but he's willing to let her inside the cabin and even reassures her that,
"We've got plenty. You stay put. I'll be right back,"
when she protests taking the food. If she is part of a group with bad intentions, they now have a perfect mark and know where to raid for supplies. On the other hand, working together and being kind is going to lead to a better future overall. While people often mistake kindness for weakness, we are only as good as we treat each other, and society can only work as a whole if we all help each other out and share resources. While Walt may be a little too open given the circumstances, his heart is in the right place and his intentions are pure. As Clementine makes her way back inside the ski lodge, she is flagged down by Luke, who's discovered a picture of Walt and Matthew that confirms Matthew was the man Nick shot. Luke wants to hide the information from both Nick and Walt, worried about how the latter will react and wanting to spare Nick from him knowing how bad his earlier mistake really was. The right thing to do is to be honest with everyone. Nick will never be able to get better if his mistakes are hidden from him. He needs to face them head on and learn from them. Walt appears to be the kind of person that would forgive a mistake even as it affected him so badly. And we don't even have to wait to tell anyone. Nick walks up as Clem and Luke are talking, and you can show him the photo. He immediately wants to tell Walt to do the right thing, even as Luke is still trying to keep it quiet. Clementine goes to retrieve the knife she'd found earlier from her backpack, having realized it was Matthew's, but Walt has already found it and is now on the front porch putting the pieces together. He's devastated at the loss, but his first concern is to find out whether or not Nick is a good person. He asks Clementine about the incident as Nick is coming outside, and Nick confesses while apologizing profusely. Before they can fully resolve the strife, the wind picks up and the wind turbine starts making a lot of noise as it rotates faster and faster. The group realizes the noise is a problem and hurries to shut the turbine off, with the adults in the group once more showing their ineptitude by having Clem figure out how to stop it. Thankfully, she's able to figure it out, but not before a herd of zombies shuffles out of the woods. Just as things seem like they couldn't get any worse, machine gun fire echoes all around and Carver comes out of the woods, with a small group that includes Bonnie, to save the day. Getting the group inside, he demands that Rebecca come out from wherever she's hiding and threatens to kill Carlos if she doesn't. He starts by breaking several of Carlos's fingers as Rebecca and Alvin argue about what to do. Rebecca wants Clementine to go and find Kenny and Luke, hoping they will be able to do something from outside the cabin, and Alvin wants to just surrender. The best thing to do here would be to just give themselves up. Carver to this point hasn't killed anyone, and he seems more intent on bringing them all back with him than actually hurting them. Again though, it is Clementine who has to convince Rebecca to do the right thing before things get too out of hand. But surrendering isn't the end of it, as a shot rings out, killing one of Carver's people. In retaliation, Carver grabs Walt and shoots him without hesitation before threatening to kill someone else if the shooter doesn't come out. A second shot barely misses Carver, and he quickly grabs Alvin as a human shield. As he walks toward the window with Alvin in front of him, he talks about someone named George, who he claims Alvin murdered in cold blood. But before we can get too much of that backstory, Clementine yells out for Kenny and Luke to stop shooting, and Carver realizes she might be a better pawn. Throwing Alvin down, he grabs Clem, putting a gun to her head. It's this action that finally makes Kenny surrender, and the episode ends as Carver and his group are leading everyone out of the lodge and into the night. The situation with Carver is a lot more complex than anything from Season 1, and it's going to be something we spend a lot of time in the next episode on. While it's easy to write him off as the big bad guy, it's also important to acknowledge that his actions are tied to the actions of the little group Clem has been with for the past week. Something big happened between them before Clem met them, but that's for next week. For now, I want to say thank you to everyone that has watched this series to this point and taken the time to leave comments letting me know what choices they made, general thoughts on the series, and ideas for other games to dive into in the future. I've also got a series called Friend or Foe, where I dive into the characters in the series and what makes them tick, determining if they'd be a good friend or someone you want to avoid at parties. I'll link that playlist alongside the playlist for this series in the description below. I've also got a Patreon and channel memberships for those who are interested in things like early access to content and other things I've got going on. I'm an author with several books available on Amazon, and I share my works as I write them over on Patreon. So, if that's something that sounds interesting to you, feel free to go check it out using the link below. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.